For this week's challenge in our sports theme Prep and Data Month, we're looking at international football. So we've got the results here of international teams playing in various tournaments. The data goes back a very long way, as we can see. It goes all the way back to the first official ones in like the 1800s. But as you know from this challenge, we're going to filter this down a little bit to look at the more recent game as we might remember in our lifetimes. So, first of all, for this analysis that we're doing, we don't want any qualifiers. So, for example, we can see here for the AFC Asian Cup, we have the Asian Cup and then also the qualification rounds, so the rounds that you need to play in order to get a place in the actual competition. So, we're just going to exclude those. So, we've got a contains calculation there, so not contains qualification, the word qualification. I've wrapped it in a lowercase in case any competitions have decided to capitalise the Q, just so we pick up all those qualification rounds at that part. We could also do it as a clean here, a filter here for a wildcard match and select to exclude values that contain the word qualification. So two ways of doing it, with a calculation or with the kind of more interface options. So then we want to try and identify the football associations of these tournaments. So for example, the Asian Cup, I'm going to keep coming back to that, is the AFC Asian Cup. So we want to just extract the AFC part, anything that's in capitals basically, so that we know what the football association is associated with that tournament. So I found the easiest way to do that was with regex. I, in all honesty, couldn't think of a simpler way to do it, because regex is quite familiar to me, that's the way that I chose to go with. But let's take a look at the regex. So we're using regex extract for the tournament, and we're saying that the bit that we want to extract, so we put these quotation marks around the string, we put a bracket to show this is the part that I'm looking for. So capital A to capital Z in square brackets means any capital letter. In curly brackets, I've got this 2 and a comma, so that means that there needs to be 2 or more, so that, for example, we're not just capturing from, say, the African Cup of Nations. We don't just want the letter A to come out there because they don't have their football association at the start, so we just want it to be anything where it's a string of uppercase letters, basically. And we close that off, so that is 2 or more, and then we do a dot star to say there can be anything that follows those capitalized letters, and that gives us this field here for our football association. So for example, for that Asian Cup, we can see it has just pulled out AFC, which is great. So then we want a field which doesn't include the football association in the tournament name, and that's going to create our competition field. So we just use a calculated field here to say if that is null, that football association, there's nothing to replace, so we just leave it as the tournament. Otherwise, we're going to replace the tournament with the football association and replace it with a blank string. And then, of course, that's going to create some fields that have these spaces at the front. So, for example, the Asia Cup, we can tell that there is a space at the front of that. It might not be so easy to tell, so we want to go and clean that up and remove these spaces. So trim the spaces, and then that space has disappeared. So we see our order kind of shift around there because that's what's happened for us. Cool. And then final change that we're going to make before we can join on to kind of filter this down to just the competitions we're interested in. We can see here that we've got I was looking for which field it is that we actually care about. Let's look at the actual competitions list for me so that I can remember the name of it. I'm looking for the Africa Cup of Nations here. So if I'm looking back in my competition field here, then I am looking for that Africa Cup of Nations. And actually, I don't feel like this change was necessary. Oh, it's already happened. That's why I can't find it. Silly. So in my competition field, I've got the Africa Football Cup, I've got the African Cup of Nations. Yeah, again, I don't think that change that I made to replace the word African with Africa was actually helpful to me. Maybe there was a reason behind it. Let me just double check. So let's find the word Africa. Filter it down to that. So I've got the Africa Football Cup, the African Cup of Nations. Yep, nope. It wasn't necessary this step here. Um, Clearly, at some point it was in my analysis, but maybe there was an issue with the data, and then where it's updated, that's been removed. So it should be fine if I just were to delete that step. But yes, this is the list of the international competitions that we actually care about, so we can see who the participants are. Is it on a continental basis or a global basis? What continent are they from? What is the football association and the competition associated with them, and the dates. So this is going to help us validate that the data we're getting through is the correct data, basically. So we do that join on just the competition name for now, and we can see that we get rid of a lot of rows at this point, which is good because these are all the matches that we're not so interested in our analysis. And then, so we're going to take a look. I'm going to add in a clean step in between here so that we can take a look at it before I make changes and not get so confused. So we can see, for example, the Football Association coming from the international competitions table is complete, but we still have some null values in the Football Association here. So for example, for the Africa Cup of Nations, this table that we initially were working with didn't include a football association, so we don't have anything there. But I'm pretty sure that there are some rows that are not coming up correctly. So I'm going to try and find those ones. Maybe championship is a good example. Okay, so we know that we're interested in the CONCACAF championship, CONCACAF, if you will. But we can see that there are multiple football associations that are being associated. So we only want to keep the rows where the football association is the same in both fields, or where it's null, maybe here, but there's only one value in this field. So that requires a little calculation for us. So we're just doing a quick calculation to say, do the football associations match from both tables? And that's going to either give us a true, false, or a null. And then, so for the null, we can see that that's just where those ones are null. These ones have their corresponding. For the false, that's those rows where, for the championship, we've got the extra football associations coming through, and so we just want to exclude that false value, so that now we can just use this as our football association field, the one that's coming from our international competitions table, and that is all good. Lovely. So now that we've got the rows of the matches that we need, then we're just going to update a few fields, get rid of a few fields, rename a few fields. So just updating that football association to say if it's null, then we'll take that. This doesn't seem like a necessary field at all. Why didn't we just keep this one? Unsure. Let's just check if they're all exactly the same. But I think that this possibly, again, is left over from analysis that maybe I was doing before. Okay. So basically, we can just keep this field as the one that we use. And then we're removing some additional fields, and so on. So with our competition field, we can see, if I go back a step, that the Gold Cup one, so that is with CONCACAF. So we can see here that it changed its name, basically, between 1989 and 1991. So we want the Championship and the Gold Cup to come together. So in other words, if our football association is that CONCACAF, then we want it to be renamed as the Gold Cup. Otherwise, stay the same, so that it kind of just is consistent across fields. Even though there was a name change, it's now referred to as the Gold Cup. Cool. Now we want to just filter it to be from the 1950s onwards. I said at the start that we want it to be within our living memories of football. That's not necessarily true for me. I was not born in the 50s, but I think that we'll go with that. So it's past all the world wars, so things are a bit more comparable. So we're just going to create a decade field, and I did this a really strange way where I took the year of the date, made it a string, only kept the first 3 characters, and then added a 0 to that. A much simpler way would have been to round the year of the date field to -1, and that is going to round it to the nearest 10. So I'm just going to update that calculation. I think I might be missing a bracket here. I am. But then this is going to give us exactly the same, basically, values for the decades. So I'll save that and nothing changed there. Um, it's just a bit simpler. Although, it does seem to have rounded it differently. That's interesting. Let's look at, yeah, it's rounding up. Interesting. I would have expected it to round down. Ooh, maybe we wouldn't do it this way then. Interesting. Let's leave it as it was before, so I'll undo that change. I want it to round down to the nearest tens. So, interesting. Even though my method was a bit strange, it worked. So basically once we've got our decade, we can then filter just from the 1950s onwards. Cool. And then at this point, I'm going to create a match ID. So each row of our data is a match, but we're about to join on the people who scored during that match. And so, yeah, that's going to make there be multiple rows per match. So let's go ahead and just basically take the date and go to the create calculated field and go to rank, and that's going to give us this pop-out visual editor. So we've got the rank here, the date here, and we just add in the home team as well, so that even though multiple matches happen on a day, we know which match is which, and we get, as you can see, 3,847 unique values, which is the same as our number of rows. So that's basically our row ID, but that is useful for us because we want to calculate the total number of matches in each competition. And when we join on to our goal scorers, there might be 0 goals in a match, so we might lose some of those matches. So let's calculate that first with a fixed level of detail, where we're just going to our match ID, going to create fixed ID, and then we're counting the distinct match IDs for each decade and for each competition. Cool. Now we're ready to join on our goal scorers. So I have filtered out anywhere that is null, so anywhere where no one had scored. Sorry, if we don't know, for example, what minute the goal was scored in, then we're not going to include it in our analysis, which makes sense. We can't work that out ourselves, so we exclude those nulls, and now we're joining it on. So we're saying that the date has to be the correct date, the home team and the away team have to match, and that is all good. We lose a lot of rows here, 364, where there weren't any goals in that match, and that's okay. Cool, so we get rid of any duplicate fields, and now we're ready to bring in our segment. So if we just take a look at that, so we basically want to split this out into 0, 15, 15, 30, so on and so forth, the lower limit and the upper limit. So we'll do that now. So just by going to this menu here, split values, automatic split is how I did it. So just making sure the lower bound is named as such, the upper bound is named as such. For the values where it's obviously 90 plus, then that got a lower bound of nothing and an upper bound of nothing as well, because it didn't have the dash to split on. So we just go and replace those nulls with 90 to 180, so it catches everything. A football match wouldn't go on 180 minutes, but nevertheless, it's just going to make sure it catches everything there. So we're making sure that our minute field is greater than or equal to our lower bound and less than our upper bound, so that we can tell what segment the goal was scored in, and that shouldn't affect the number of rows, which it hasn't, which is great. And now we're ready to aggregate. So we're grouping by our competition, our decade, our segment, and our matches in a decade per competition. The reason we're grouping by here is because we already worked that out at the level of detail that is in this data set at the moment. And then we're just summing up the number of rows. We could always... Nope, this is what we need to do because it's a row per goal. So yeah, we definitely need to sum it up. So then we rename this to our total goals, and we can now calculate the expected number of goals in each segment as the total goals divided by the number of matches in a decade per competition. And we just rounded that to 2 decimal places. And now we're ready to output it. So hopefully you enjoyed this challenge. I thought it was pretty fun. I think it's interesting that 90 plus minutes has pretty low expectation of goals. So you go to extra time, but what's the point? It always seems to lead to penalties, right? Anyway, thank you very much for watching.